We are live. Hi. Hello, everybody. Um, Welcome. This is the final of our little series we've been doing here at OCC that we're calling Get to Know OCC. It's our Q&A live stream that we've been doing. So today's topic is removing obstacles to healing, which is really a conversation about how to succeed at OCC, but it's really reflecting what are some common patterns that we see in pretty much everyone we work with, common barriers that come up, obstacles, and none of it surprises us. And we're ready to work with all of it. And we think it's really helpful to just kind of name up front. These are common things that show up that make it feel like either this isn't going to work for me, forget this whole thing, or from our side, it's like, okay, if this, here's some patterns. If this applies to you, let's be really cognizant of that. Let's be really eyes wide open from the beginning so that we can support you in your journey with us. So we've taken you along, we've described where OCC started with Michaela and Jessica's work together before in creation of OCC, the biology behind our approach. Our last video, we talked about what we actually do here, and that was very long. So that has been broken up into chapters. And so this is kind of our rounding things out with, now you're here, you're working with us, and how can we help everyone thrive as much as possible and really meet the work that we're bringing, that we've been describing through our other videos. So we have several things that we've brainstormed based on the 2.5 years that we've been open. And I'm going to let Michaela start us off. I think the one that we're going to start with is it's kind of a barrier that shows up when even people are like considering working with us, which is
I was going
like all the many reasons why, but for me, this isn't going to work. Mm-hmm. Which is something we see again and again and again and again. So this is a pattern where lots of people, so if you feel this way, looking at our website, watching our other videos, but this couldn't possibly work for me or apply to me in my situation, that's actually something we see a lot. So I'm going to turn over to Michaela to kind of like describe the nuance or the different types of ways this shows up for people.
Yeah. I mean, as you said it out loud, and this isn't something we listed, but of course there are some genuine obstacles, and we're talking about the ones, assuming you're able to access our care, that come up. But for the folks that financially it is not possible right now, I really want to take a moment to acknowledge that and how painful that can be. Mm-hmm. And that we are living with that I know what that feels like also. And it's something that we are always holding and always ever hoping that as we move through as a business that is still really in this infancy of trying to succeed and keep our doors open so that we can offer the care, that there are people who can't access our care right now, and this hurts us deeply. And we are hoping that as we grow, that there will be other opportunities. Someday we envision scholarships and grants and programs and ways of folding in other members who maybe have some resources that they can contribute. And, when they've received care from us that has really been life-changing and mm-hmm. life-sustaining and life-enhancing, that they would, if they had the resources to do it, might want to offer some to someone who does not. So I just thought it came to me as you were saying that's not what the subject of today's topic is.
Our goal, like what we really aspire to, is that anyone who wants to work with us and mm-hmm. get our care, that we can say, yes, we can work with you no matter what your financial situation is. That's where we want to be. Mm-hmm. And like Mick said, we're a baby business. And so we're also trying to just stay alive too. And we're playing with different ideas around that as we keep moving forward. Yeah.
And there's another thread where the financial piece comes in. I think we'll get into it a little later, but for people who theoretically can, and still the finances creep in. So when you were describing it, Christine, one of the little notes that I just wrote, you can see that I sometimes look down and take notes to remind myself, but just that people tend to think that the obstacles that are coming up are unique to them. And I think that why we're having this is partly to normalize it. You said this in a different way, but it really, these are the things that make it feel like, no, for me though, this won't work. And so it is one of the traps that can happen for people. And so I think as you listen to the different manifestations of what can happen, the fears that come up, it really has all to do with the autonomic nervous system and the ways it is trying to protect you by flagging all sorts of things that may not work. It is part of the dysregulation itself that becomes the barrier to you getting the help you need. And this is why we're well suited to work with it and to see it and recognize it and know how to move through. So I don't know if there are some specifics that you want to start with, Christine.
So these are some that we've seen in our people. So some of the manifestations of but for me, we've had members say, I'm too old. Right. And that's actually been varying ages. People in their 60s, 70s, 80s saying, I'm actually too old for this to work. I'm too sick. I have all these diagnoses. I've been sick for this long. I'm too sick. This won't work for me.
I'm sicker than most.
I'm sicker than most people. I'm too busy. I have too much going on in my life. I don't think this won't work. My circumstances are too difficult. I have this home situation. I have this volatile thing relationally with someone in my family, whatever's going on, that my circumstances won't allow this to work for me. Some that another thing is for me, this won't work because nothing's ever worked. Or I haven't been able to I can't ever follow through. Why would this be different?
Yeah, let's pull some of these apart and really just talk about them. I think since the last one you just said was, we have very different ways that the autonomic nervous system appears in people's lives. For some people, part of their survival and the way that they know that they've been really conditioned to succeed in life and to feel like they're safe is high achieving, succeed at everything, be busy, do more, be more productive, always on top of it, meanwhile, denying the body's needs, denying connection with family or social things and a balanced life. And that it is really, it's driven by, unconsciously, of course, it is really driven by this is what in my history I learned made me acceptable, this is where I have felt most accepted and therefore safe. And this is conditioned in different ways. And then other people experience, I've never been successful at anything. I feel like a failure. I don't have motivation. I don't have discipline. These are things that we hear a lot. There have been so many other things I've tried that, I've earnestly wanted to do and had no success. I was never, I really want to highlight, there's usually a shaming or really self-critical, impatient with themselves, disappointed in themselves, kind of a messaging there, which I very much understand and can relate to. And the truth of it is we can see why that is. It's not laziness. It is not lack of motivation, lack of caring, lack of anything. It's not a personal problem. It is not a reflection of who you are or your character. There are actual physiologic reasons why these barriers are here. And we're 100% equipped to support people through that. Likewise, very equipped, Christine, to help support people through the survival approach of handling everything and managing everything and doing everything.
Why are you looking at me?
So two very right on the polarity, it looks so different, but it's not different at all.
Yeah.
And in terms of the underlying driver, somewhere these are the ways that, you know, they're both designed to protect, believe it or not. And yes, this is, you know, one is preventing you feel like if you could follow through, if you could, life would be different. But there is a way that the autonomic nervous system, it's a particular pattern that is helping to protect you through these ways, comes through as resistance, seen as procrastination, often immobilization, extreme fatigue. There are lots of ways, and this is like where our executive functioning isn't really online. We're in this very reptilian hindbrain place that is only concerned with surviving this moment and doesn't even have the capacity. This executive functioning is where we do everything like reasoning and impulse control and I want this outcome. So maybe delayed gratification here or applied something here. We don't have any of that online. And we're here. Part of what we have to do to even get it online is to understand some of this on this physiologic level so that we can bring some self-compassion on. Because the second we're critical, shamey, you know, any of that kind of self-talk comes in, it is sabotaging your ability to be able to do it. This is, by the way, this is so much science and research around this. And it really is because it doesn't, if somebody else were speaking to you in that way, the kind of way that it would shut you down and put you in a state of protection, that immediately takes this offline. Likewise, when we're doing it to ourselves, same process. We're reinforcing old trauma patterns of helplessness, and we need to come through that with support from other people, and also the understanding, the physiologic understanding of why. It might be less obvious, and I think this is actually one of the things that we're going to talk about later. It might be less obvious to the people who are crushing it in life on the outside, right? Because right, you know, to someone else it might be like, oh, they've got it all, they're handling everything, they seem to be managing everything. No, there's a different kind of real distress and real physiologic consequence to that. And we see people that are on that spectrum who are also, like, for the same reasons, experiencing, you know, we touched on this a little bit actually when we were talking about if anyone were watching was it Anatomy of a Chronic Illness, where you, Christine, were talking about your threat and the sources of your threat versus the kind that Allie was experiencing, and how the body, the biology, the biological response in both cases, which just to name it explicitly now, in both cases, Christine's like, I need to do well on this test. I need to perform well at school. I need to be able to, like, I have a whole full day of, you know, like, that is the same stress survival biology, like running from the saber-toothed tiger, you know, climbing the tree to escape the threatening thing, or fighting it off, as someone who's experiencing something that actually is indicating a lack potentially of physical or psychological safety. So the point is, it's the same biology that comes online. It's a very primitive biology that is not intended to deal with the kinds of threats that we're experiencing in our present day culture. And this is part of what anyone would learn in our class, but it really is a reflection of our biology is still set to a time when our stress, our survival biology only came online in real life threats: starvation, animal that's going to maul you to death, you know, things like this. Like,
infection,
really
weather.
need to take, we really needed to run, we really needed to fight. And if we couldn't, we would death feign, which has this very deep analgesic quality. Another way of saying that is immobilization, or freeze, or paralyzed. And that was like our last resort possible way of escaping it and or escaping the pain of it. Okay. That's what our biology is designed to deal with. What it never had to deal with in this primitive time before civilization and agriculture was any of the relational threats. People being upset with us, people not feeling loved, not feeling cared for, not feeling like our needs were being met. Like the gamut of things that come up in relationships, the way that we abandon our own needs, that way that we are dissociated away from our bodies, none of that was a concern for us.
And not to say that everyone was like nice all the time, just in, you know, but it's that it wasn't in a context of relational trauma, like
Right.
early relational trauma, so that like when there was disagreement, there was like it was from a place of connection and safety that people could have different ideas about something.
Well, and
And
also deeply motivated
because I just
by,
want to be clear, we're not saying it was like a utopia back in
no,
primitive times. Because I think I've had conversations where people are like, "What are you talking? Like this doesn't make sense." And it's that we people's evolutionary needs were met as infants and children in the context of what Dr. Narsha, I'm not saying her name right, Darsha
Darabont.
Narvaez, the evolved nest, that like our species evolved with a certain set of cultural and social practices that is for our species. Like that's we evolved in this context over, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And so there was the baseline felt sense of safety and connection through which all social interactions were experienced. So negotiations, you think this, I think that, we have a disagreement about a thing, and there were like cultural social practices that still held connection and safety within. Yeah, humans are still humans, there's
Well,
conflict, people get upset with each other, but
if I may round that out a little bit, it is to say that the level of motivation to find something agreeable to work with in cooperation was extremely high. This is why,
yes.
and maybe it helps, Christine, because I think you have a little bit better of a handle on like the timeline of this. We're not talking about like we're talking about a time before like we had any like
Yeah.
larger agricultural like separate land, anything. We're talking about 150 band hunter gatherer societies that you need to find, you need to be agreeable, you need to be cooperative, you need to do your share. It's
Mm-hmm.
self-governing, because if not, then you are exiled from the tribe and therefore you don't survive. So there was a high level of motivation to care for one another, to really be there, to be a part of that. So if you were sick or you were injured, you received care. And this is why, in addition to what you're saying, Christine, which is more like this very specific div, you know adequate developmental safety, that the hardwiring of the infant is such that it
Mm-hmm.
expects to be cared for.
Mm-hmm.
We
And
have
if you're in
lost
a
that.
community where everyone has that, then as adults,
Yes,
everyone's expecting cooperation, everyone's
correct.
expecting safety and communication. And so that's the context that we're talking about, where there weren't these like deep breaches of it.
Yeah.
And that this is what our biology evolved over. Like we're kind of talking like 300,000 years ago to about 15,000 years ago. And then with agriculture and civilization, that's when we start, how humans live starts deviating from our evolutionary like set point, right?
Mhm.
So our biology is literally evolved, like humans evolved the way that they did with certain, like the thing that makes humans so cool is all of our social and cultural practices and our brain and all this cool stuff.
And by the way,
um
we're not saying we should be going back to that necessarily, but what we
yeah.
are saying is that our biology is primitive and it's a mismatch for our culture, and the only way to live in a healthy way in our culture is to understand what our biology needs, so that we're working with it rather than fighting against it, so that we understand it, so that we can work with it in a way that supports health.
I want to just you guys obviously know this, but I'm listening and knowing that there's like one little nugget that is missing from this particular explanation, which is that what Christine and Michaela are describing is that in our culture now, the nervous system not having those evolutionary needs met, the biological needs met adequately in very early life, ends up with a nervous system, and this is our language that you've heard in other videos, that is dysregulated, meaning that it is not accurately concluding safety or threat in every moment while it's scanning everywhere, particularly relationally, as they're describing right now. That's a place where our nervous systems are often concluding danger or threat instead of safety. And what that leads to in the body, why we're talking about all of this, is because that dysregulated nervous system, meaning it's choosing to activate the survival biochemistry in your body more often than is really optimal or needed to keep you alive in our current culture. And so what this ends up with is a chronic state of inflammation. And so today we're talking about the variety of ways that things can come up that feel like obstacles and actually are obstacles to making progress and having the most efficient healing journey with OCC or any healing journey. But it is important that you understand this context of kind of like why these things are the way they are, with the cultural changes for humans, and also the biology that we all have, this human biology of our autonomic nervous system, and that this autonomic dysregulation that we speak of is nearly ubiquitous in our culture.
I love that. Thank you for bringing that in, because, and I'll say it, I love the way you say it this way. Your body can do one thing or the other in these two choices. Healthy physiologic function, which is often referred to as health, growth, and restoration, digestion, immune function, detoxification, healthy cell turnover, repair, all of these things. Or it can prioritize survival. So Jess is describing where all of those resources that would be going to those other things are now being allocated to your limbs so that you can fight or flee. And that's really critically important in the context of, okay, now we have the perception of relational threat in our hardwiring of our autonomic nervous system. And relationally, we're encountering potential threat every day, unlike the acute survival, like there's a lion or a bear kind of things, right? Rarely, fortunately, are those kinds of things happening for us. But the same biology is being employed, and that's what makes it chronic. So we get stuck in a chronic state that way, that has turned off or turned way down our ability to do this healthy physiologic function, and is instead prioritizing this survival biology. And that is really what we're saying. And polyvagal theory, we've got other videos that are really going a lot more deeply into this, but it really helps us to identify that as mammals, this is why our biology necessitates that we feel safe and connected in relationships. We depend on one another for survival. As we indicated earlier, that was 100% true as an adult. So therefore, the biology feels that way now, even if you can order Grubhub or get your groceries delivered and do it on your own. You actually still biologically need to feel safe in relationship to yourself and others. And the self part is something that we go much more deeply into in our class, because it really is critically important. But
okay. And I think emphasizing for like today, what the conversation today is, like you said, how in our culture, regardless really of your personal biography, we have a set point where we have dysregulated nervous systems because our culture just doesn't meet what our body is needing and expecting. And we have our own biographies of particular, really bad stuff that has happened to us since we were little, from little traumas to bigger traumas, right? So, because we all have this biology, we know everyone who's coming to us is coming with a very dysregulated autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. So the patterns that we're gonna get into and describe more that we see are just sort of different manifestations of a nervous system that is skewed to be like hyper vigilant, looking for threat, in this dysregulated, overly vigilant, overly like, I'm set for things to be really bad and really wrong. And so this new thing called Origins Collaborative Care, let me figure out all the reasons this is bad and wrong and isn't going to work. And that's kind of part of one of the why we can speak to this in generalities, and with these patterns that we're seeing in our people, is because we know that this is, we can, and Mick's going to keep describing more how these are just sort of different flavor or different ways that the autonomic nervous system dysregulation can reveal itself along the way of working with us as these obstacles. And really everything that we're saying that's an obstacle, because we have this lens on it, we know that these are all opportunities, and we turn them into opportunities for the particular healing and growth of however that's showing up for that person. And because we have that lens, that's how we can
well, and we didn't start off with this.
them.
We didn't start off with this, but maybe we should have said the primary obstacle to everyone's healing is that their autonomic nervous system is dysregulated. And I'd like to actually, just to like, as an obstacle, for those of you who are like, I'm not convinced that any of that's true, let me double down on this, and Jess will also, as the medical provider, but the healthcare provider. Maybe you don't believe how, and the developmental trauma and the culture and all of that. That's okay. You are sick. You are chronically sick. You have not been able to get better. We know now that there is dysregulation. 100%. There is no question that dysregulation is happening now because of how the biology works. And so therefore it is now an obstacle to healing and the opportunity to initiate healing. Mm-hmm. So check. There's one more obstacle that we can
and so let me just say to that, because I was inspired to say it a little bit ago, so now it's twice. So I'm going to say it in case anyone has this question. Just to clarify, the immune system is receiving resources in both a state of safety and connection and a state of protection, but the functions of the immune system are different in those two states. And it's another place where the English language kind of fails us when we talk about immune function. I just want to clarify that health, growth, and restoration in the immune system involves autophagy. It involves new mitochondria being built. It involves mitochondria fusing together and becoming larger and more efficient. It involves resolution of inflammation. Christine, you're like, oh, cool.
Like, cool.
So there's lots of stuff that the immune system is doing in a state of safety, and it is not doing that stuff that is super important to your feeling of well-being and your actual health when you're in a state of protection or not safety, according to the autonomic nervous system. In that place, the immune functions are pro-inflammatory and not resolving.
Right.
So it
like mast cells
and then a whole bunch of other inflammatory cascades, and then leading to chronic inflammation. And so Michaela's statement that if you're here ill, you have you have autonomic dysregulation, and the biochemistry or the physiology of that is that the underpinnings of all disease as we know it in the medical field is chronic inflammation. And when you really dig into what is that is inflammation that is not able to be resolved. Why is it not able to be resolved? Because you do not have enough safety and connection on board to enter those immune processes to resolve the inflammation. And inflammation that cannot be resolved begets more inflammation, and that ends up equaling chronic inflammation.
So those are the healthy repair type immune functions that you were talking about, though. That's what's not coming on board, because you need that safety and connection to do the resolving of the inflammation. You need to be in that mode. Yeah.
This is a critical point, because it would be an obstacle for someone listening. You may in fact have plenty of safety, and you may in fact have plenty of loving connection. Does your body know this? These are unconscious. This is an unconscious belief held in the body that is governed by something called neuroception, which is entirely below our conscious awareness. And when we refer to the autonomic nervous system, 80% of those nerve fibers are stored within the body, communicating from here to the brain. And we only, like, the brain really represents 20% of those ANS fibers. And that we have to lean on very heavily to try and help the body to feel safe. But intellectually understanding you're safe is not the same as the body knowing it is safe. And so the other little piece of it is feeling safe and connected, safe while connected. Because again, this is part of what, you know, we've been trying to point out, that in fact, there is this way that we're anticipating safe, that we don't feel fully held and supported in the world, that we, you know, we're trying to earn our right to be safe, or, you know, that a lot of our behaviors and motivations are actually oriented to trying to stay in the tribe, so to speak, and stay in connection to people. And you know, working with it really involves understanding how it is playing out. And we can't go deeply into that now, but that is what the class helps walk us through. So yeah.
And then I'll just add, because again, this is the second time I felt like I should add it, that because the neuroception is scanning within the body, outside in the environment, and in relationship to others, the fact of being really inflamed actually ends up producing a bunch of neuroception of danger. And so this is a feed forward spiral downhill in terms of your health. In other words, the dysregulation gets fed by itself, by the physiology of the dysregulation. And so,
and this is all below your awareness. Like, this is all happening. There's no conscious, the scanning that Jessica's talking about.
But it is an opportunity. And of course, at OCC, we work together to harness these aspects of the opportunity, to, you know, to induce some healing and to bring regulation on board. So anyway, it's exciting stuff. But let's talk about obstacles.
Well, and just quickly to say, we call that in class the threat perpetuation cycle. And that really is involving both the autonomic nervous system dysregulation and then the way that the ANS directly communicates with this primitive part of our immune system, the mast cells, and how that feed forward cycle, that threat perpetuation cycle, happens, because both systems are concerned with promoting your survival and defense. And they both get dysregulated, and they both lose their ability to accurately know what is safe and what's benign or even healthy. That's part of what happens. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we don't have a way to reach the mast cells directly other than through the autonomic nervous system. We can support the mast cells in a little bit of stabilization with things like antihistamines and all of that. But the only way to really get regulation, stabilization, the mast cells to understand that we are actually okay is through the ANS. And so here we are. Okay. More obstacles. We'll get into.
So that's actually maybe a good segue to me saying that one of the potential obstacles arises in the context of people's physical health or lack thereof. And because part of how we help people to partner with their autonomic nervous systems, partner with the symptoms that come up for them, partner with the messages that have thus far been perceived as threat, so that we can do what Michaela brilliantly calls containment of that threat perpetuation cycle, right? Really, really settle that, the communication between the ANS threat message and the immune threat message, get in there, break into that perpetuation cycle and settle things down on both sides. We need to be able to be okay, communicate to the body and to the nervous system, we are okay, even though we're suffering right now. We're not saying just be like this forever, but we've got to interrupt this feed forward cycle. And so we will teach you how to partner with all of this. But we can't do that safely unless we already have ruled out, that you already have had your providers rule out the fact that there is something acutely life-threatening causing your symptoms. In other words, if you have terrible headaches, somebody, hopefully your PCP or you've been referred to a neurologist, and someone has done a scan on your brain to make sure that you don't have a tumor that does in fact need surgical intervention to be able to know that your headaches don't mean you're about to die. Because at some point working with us, we need to go ahead and say, hi, headache, I know you. Thankfully, even though it feels like this is, a life-threatening message, I know it's not a life-threatening message right now. And then working from there. And so that's really there is this healthcare portion that it is important that people have been worked up for, medical issues that do need kind of a Western medicine intervention acutely. So I wanted to share that.
Well, in class, we call those predictable protective patterns. And it isn't exclusive to physical symptoms like, our illness symptoms, the way those manifest. We're including behavioral, mental, emotional patterns as well. But that said, our predictable protective patterns. So part of what you do with us is let's work together. Have you been worked up? What is normal for you right now, so that we aren't so concerned. When we recognize it, we can soothe and not be so concerned. It probably sounds like being friendly with, no one wants to feel friendly with a migraine. And yet part of what we mean by friendly is that we're trying to contain the spiral that leads us to the ER, or the spiral that actually is creating more inflammation, more fear, more, actually making the symptom potentially worse. Now there's vertigo. It's more like, okay, like how do we just interrupt this a little bit to see how we can reverse this threat perpetuation cycle that we've been referring to? And part of how we do that is like consciously, what is normal for me right now, so that then when something isn't, we can flag it and ask about it and know about it. Does it require a workup? Is it something we just want to notice, see what happens in a couple of days? Or is it acute enough that go get a workup now? Yes. So to try to create real safety there, because I think it's very important that we aren't just trying to create some false sense of safety. What we want is accurate autonomic awareness, which means to develop a hardwired, updated, recalibrated autonomic nervous system that is up to date with the present moment circumstances, with us as competent, aware adults that understand what's happening within their biology. And then you can really partner with the unconscious part of your ANS. You can consciously partner with the unconscious part of your ANS to assess and evaluate your safety in the moment and then settle it down. And this is the beginning of the rewiring of developing that safety, rather than reinforcing that we are in danger.
And this workup is something that, again, depending how you're coming into work with us or whatever, that would be with other providers. So sort of coming to us with an understanding that, okay, these chronic symptoms, I've ruled out that any of them are life-threatening. They're very uncomfortable. I hate them. I want to, I'm here. You're showing up at OCC because we want to support you in shifting your biology towards healing and repairing these. And so that's something that we would work with you, along at the beginning and along the way, kind of making sure that you're held in safety in that way.
This is a good segue to one of the other potential obstacles to healing, which happens sometimes, which is, we call it too many cooks in the kitchen, meaning someone has so many providers, they have lots of different providers in different realms who are inevitably going to give conflicting information. Someone, and again, this is not to diminish the value or the integrity or the right. We don't want you like blanketly believing everything we say without you and your sensibilities more so than anyone's. But it can be very difficult if we're continuing to really rely heavily on a lot of different advice from a lot of different people. It will get very confusing, and oftentimes it will conflict with our recommendations, right? Even within the like more integrative functional medicine realm, right? One of the most common things related to mast cell activation would be a low histamine diet, and we have a very different approach to that. We can see where through our lens of threat, where virtually everybody we've ever worked with, unless it's for a very contained period of time for more immediate symptom relief, that it actually brings on more of a sense of threat and, introduces secondary unintentional consequences to trying to create more safety here, where there ends up being all of this additional threat around food, fearing, that we're going to eat something that is going to harm us. And then also the way it takes us out of social connection. Food is such an important part of being able to socialize and feed each other and be fed and all of that. And so it ends up being like further, again, like not unlike the way the pandemic really created some unintended consequences of trying to keep us safe, that actually created more of a sense of threat in our own bodies. So just naming that, like, we'll talk to you about it. And are there ways to collaborate? Are there ways that, we're not blanketly saying at all, not in any way, to leave other practitioners. Just, if it becomes difficult for you to know what to do and it's creating threat, it'll be something that we address together and talk about.
And often I think, sometimes we're recommending do nothing about that right now, because this is within the construct of your particular patterns of, your body's survival messages. And if you have another provider that's saying, change meds, get this workup, do that. It really comes down, like, we can't tell you not to follow your provider's instructions. We would never tell you not to follow your provider's instructions. And so it really ends up coming, sometimes I say, one of the decisions that each person needs to make when they decide to come to OCC is, am I leaning into the fact, the science proves this. Yes, we are stating this, but this isn't just our belief. Like, the science backs up the fact that if you are dealing with chronic illness, you have a dysregulated autonomic nervous system. And the very biggest opportunity to develop health in a body that has been sick is to develop regulation in the autonomic nervous system. And so it's really going to fall to you to decide, wow, if my symptoms are falling within my patterns that I already have been worked up for, that I already have gotten assurance are not immediately dangerous to me, I am going to choose to not seek other input right now. I'm going to follow this path toward autonomic regulation.
Yeah.
And that's not, we always, if we ever see anything that we think might be dangerous, we will all encourage you to go get worked up. No question about it. Now, some people are working with me as a healthcare provider, and I can help assess that. Other people are just doing autonomic work with us, and they're not working with me directly. And so I just want to make that clear that, I am the only healthcare provider here. I'm the only licensed healthcare provider here. And so so I will not override your other providers. That's just disrespectful. I can order workups. I can, encourage you to do certain things. I can order medications, etc. But in the absence of my input doing that, it really falls to you, the member, to decide what are you comfortable with. And I would really encourage, doing a thoughtful look at that, making sure you feel good about the workups you've had, and then making a conscious choice when you're ready to lean into the autonomic regulation work, because that is where the biggest opportunity for reduction in your inflammation that would then allow actual healing in your body and mind and all the rest of things to occur.
So I think sometimes having a really specific example to wrap your mind around can be helpful. So to your point, you're having gastrointestinal problems, right? Constipation or chronic diarrhea, some kind of itis, it's like inflamed, IBS, whatever. One of the things, even let's say you're out of state and you're unable to work with Jessica directly, we can educate you on some of the reasons why that is occurring through the autonomic nervous system lens, through an MCAS lens, through, inflammation, through intestinal permeability. There are lots of different ways we can talk about it, just to give you some context for understanding why this is. Likewise, you've been worked up for it, hopefully, but I assure you, if you call your gastroenterologist and report something that is troubling you, it would be irresponsible of them to just say it's fine. They will likely say, and here I want to be really explicit about this, they'll likely say come in for a workup, or let me come examine you, or maybe let's schedule an endoscopy or a colonoscopy. Okay. And to the frightened ANS of a dysregulated member, they're concerned too. It's a problem. It's an emergency that needs to be handled. When in fact, probably, and we can help develop your sense of this. And this is again why it's so important to identify what is normal for me right now. It doesn't require that, but then it's such an inflammatory experience in and of itself to be anesthetized and have an invasive procedure and have all the fear that's associated with it. It goes on and on and on in the ways that it is actually undermining your ability to heal. So that's where that becomes.
And I've had this sort of smirky smile on my face because I had this exact experience working with Jess and working with the autonomic nervous system work, where I can think of several different sets of symptoms where it was like, this is just a thing my body's do. I've had the work of, I could keep running to urgent care. I could keep running, but it's like, this is just a manifestation of this, set of symptoms. I was having all these throat things, swollen glands, things in my throat. How many strep tests does a person need? It wasn't strep, right? And so I was saying, like, this is just a manifestation and getting comfortable. Oh, it's my throat thing. And I haven't had those symptoms in years, just fast forward years from that period. So, we're not just saying this, we've also lived it as well. GI symptoms, and it is a real paradigm shift to say, oh, this is symptom that I get sometimes when I'm this. And now I have a much more nuanced understanding of the autonomic nervous system and what's at play and why right now in this little phase of time, this might be showing up for me. But that's where we want that the work that we engage with you in brings you to that place, and that deeply knowing your autonomic nervous system and your body and how you're working.
And I just want to say, like, and Michaela did allude to this, your gastroenterologist or your neurologist or your PCP or whomever, your rheumatologist, it's not that they're, they can't tell you don't do anything. They want to help you in their paradigm. The only ways that they know how to help you is to reassess you. It's not that they're like irresponsible for telling you to get another workup for the same set of symptoms that you've been worked up for 6 times. It's that they're at the end of what they have to do other than I'll reassess and see if there's something new causing this. They're not wrong. It's just the toolbox that they have.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's just, they have the same tool they're picking up. And we're like, we have this different toolbox over here.
Yeah.
Let's try this together.
The same, I love that, the way of saying it, because even the patterns that we keep following again and again and again, it's us picking up the same tool that isn't working. When we all had that moment when you said, how many strep tests? The autonomic nervous system, but this is really, I think, really relevant, and it is nice to have humor about it when you can see it from a point of view that where we have experienced how
Right.
true it is. The ANS doesn't learn from experience. If you were to take the odds to Vegas and like want to put all of your money on something, there's not something new to discover here most of the time. And part of our healing necessitates that we develop this deep knowing of what is happening in our own body, what is I don't like to use the word normal, partly because it implies that we're expecting you to accept this over the long haul, but I am telling you that accepting what's here now in a way that you aren't really terrified about, learning how to become friendly and familiar with what is normal for you in your body right now, is the path that is going to make these symptoms resolve. I promise. And this actually leads to another obstacle, I think, which is that, I want to say with all the compassion in the world that these symptoms are begging for your attention. So it isn't that we want you suppressing or ignoring, because we have already had a lifetime of that. We're actually learning to unlearn these patterns of like leaving our body, ignoring our symptoms, pushing past our limits, holding our bladder all day and like ignoring the signals that we have to pee, not responding to hunger. I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? We're unlearning that. We're actually learning to listen, but we're listening with a different understanding of what is happening. We're listening with more education and a conscious ability to be more involved in the discernment. This is you partnering with the unconscious part of your autonomic nervous system. And so, this really is the path to becoming more embodied in general, because I will, and I think we'll touch on an assortment of ways that we are leaving the body. There's lots of ways to dissociate that aren't I think the traditional behavioral health explanation of dissociation. If you are on Facebook and you hardly even care what you're looking at anymore, but it is like, that is dissociation. That is taking you away from your body's experience and into something else, like it's doing something for you. But busyness, I'm too busy for everything. I'm like running around from I couldn't possibly stop any, things like that. People who are highly intellectual and, they're thinking, and it's all like up here in the head and not in the body. I think we have other examples of this, but these are ways that we move out of the body. And one of the obstacles that is on our list is, ways that maybe culturally or, in your history or your specific family that you have learned how to not be particularly in touch with your body, and that we actually have to healing or the original injury happened in the body, and the unconscious autonomic nervous system, as we've said, 80% of those nerve fibers are in the body. So that's the healing has to happen here too. The safety has to be felt here, not intellectualized. We have to lean heavy on that intellectual knowing to get there, but we are bottom up beings. We are not top down beings. Our thoughts, behaviors, beliefs, our emotions, they do not originate here. They originate here. And then they come up to the brain, where the brain gets working on a narrative to explain that. It is the opposite of what we've been told to believe. And really, right now, virtually everybody is still operating top down, as if changing your thoughts is going to change your body's experience, and it won't. It can help, and we're gonna use it big time. But what we really need to do is rewire the autonomic nervous system in a very specific and intentional way, so that it's operating in a way that like is expecting safety, is expecting connection, is expecting for needs to be met, and expecting, and that you're very attuned with, so that like even the relationship between you and this unconscious part of you that's been trying to get your attention in all of these ways, when you start responding and attuning and listening, that in and of itself is indicating safety to your body. It's a way of hardwiring safety back in. In other words, it's not that we're ignoring the signals. We're just learning to listen to them differently. We're learning to listen to them with more wisdom.
And so we bring this really sort of, loving and kind understanding of why these patterns were so necessary at a certain time. Could have been like why leaving your body was in that moment the safest thing to do. That's what helped you survive something in your past, but also as like cultural patterns, why if we think of ancestral trauma, intergenerational trauma, why for particular groups of people in particular places and experiencing certain forms of systematic oppression over long periods of time, what cultural practices to leave the body was so adaptive and so necessary and such a life-giving thing in that time to literally survive. And so the work of coming back into the body, there's a lot there, and it feels so unsafe to be in the body for many reasons.
And
we hold that so tenderly and lovingly and with respect for why that was necessary and important, and how can we gently, a little bit slowly over time, bring a little bit more safety in being in the body, a little bit more safety in being in the body. So we're never asking anyone to do more than feels good or safe, because too much is part of what helped made us leave the body. So we're never asking too much of you. And we're really working, that's that partnering and working with your autonomic nervous system and coming into the body. And that's how we turn it into an opportunity, is that we need to, as we get to know each of you, we're really, looking for how these different constellations could be showing up in you so that we can be attuned to that in you and work with that,
and you
how
just
that
said
is manifesting.
Yeah, you just said something critically important, which is that for most people, a lot of these biases are totally unconscious, right? You don't even know why. It may have been handed down implicitly, the suggestion that being in the body and like that this is really the place to be. It may be completely unconscious, to the person. So this is what of our work is like, helping to make the unconscious conscious. And just to your point, we wrote something down. It's like the autonomic nervous system, part of its job is moderating how much it feels like you're equipped to know at any given time. And that probably is a statement that doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but this is really obvious. The autonomic nervous system, for anyone who's out there who really was like, oh, I didn't even really realize I had a difficult childhood until I got married and felt really safe, and then it all came up. That's an example, but that is a common one that tends to happen when there is enough safety, enough holding, that all of a sudden the autonomic nervous system is like, I think you're secure enough, stable enough to know this. And it has a really pretty sophisticated, and this is why we work with it in a way that is inviting the possibility to make the unconscious conscious, because unconsciousness is an obstacle to work with. But we never force, and we really, really work with the system to be able to give it experiences in a safe, titrated way. This is a great segue, though, to even people who have come into really valuable spiritual practices like ancient wisdom traditions, Buddhism, things like that, yogic traditions, right? Where the idea is sometimes to deny the body or transcend the body, right? And what an appealing thing. The body has not been feeling that great. And, what you may not even fully realize is that your body, it has stored a lifetime's worth of trauma, and it's there and being awakened as adults, when we experience things that are familiar. The ANS works through association. So anything that's familiar to a time that was threatening can awaken it in the body, and we're not fully conscious of that at all. We just know that something, usually the word is triggered us. And we really like the word awakened because we don't see it. It's not actually a problem. It's really like an invitation to do some healing. It's something that's stored in the body that actually needs expression so that it can move through and unburden you. But the idea that we transcend the body, it's like, no, actually, like the deeper ascension and the deepest level of spiritual practice honors that we are beings in a body that needs to honor our survival biology. And if you feel safe enough, really, like, the deepest spiritual practices are not sustainable unless you actually feel really deeply safe and rooted. Like a tree could support the biggest, widest, tallest, heaviest branches if it had real stability in the soil of the earth. So that's another place where, you know, if you are steeped in that kind of tradition, that may be an invitation. It almost seems like, well, you know, my spirit will live on anyway, right? Like we've had people who are kind of there, but like are living this life in real acute fear. So that's another opportunity. And also, I love those teachings and they are so valuable, but also the one error is that it's very top down a lot of the time. You have to listen very carefully and you can work with your mind, but appreciating that actually the thoughts and the kinds of things that are happening in your mind, your emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors, your beliefs, they're actually originating from the state of your autonomic nervous system in your body.
I was wondering if we could circle back around a little to this this idea of someone coming in saying, you know, I have all these diagnoses, I'm incredibly sick, and I think this isn't going to work for me because I actually know what's wrong. You know, I have mold
this is
toxicity,
great.
I have Lyme, and why are you making me do this other stuff?
Yeah, it's so good. Like, one of the things that the nervous system will do for us is have us feel like this knowledge of having these diagnoses makes it urgent that we get, you know, appropriate treatment for these things right now, because those are the problems. And if you can conquer those problems with the correct interventions, you will be well. And you might go back to the origin story of OCC, which I think was called Desperate Patient, Curious Provider, and see the history that Michaela was coming with these various things, and we would figure out diagnoses, and they were correct. She did have those things. We weren't wrong. And the interventions for those specific things did not make her well. And if it did resolve one thing, another thing was there to take its place as the most, acute problem right now.
I'm playing whack-a-mole.
Yes, we call this medical whack-a-mole. I think that's Stephen Porges's term. And so, and then eventually we came to understand about the nervous system and the mast cells having an interplay, perpetuating all of this stuff, all of these genuine diseases and problems and infections and toxicities and patterns. And so great question, Christine, because it can feel like a sympathetic life threat to people if they're coming in already having been diagnosed with all of these things that typically takes an alternative type provider to even make those diagnoses. Right. So by definition, those folks have been to a bunch of providers. They've already invested a ton of time, energy, and usually money.
They're like, hi, I'm ready to do the protocol.
Yeah, and yet they haven't gotten well with the interventions that have been tried so far. And so again, we come to say, that's because of this perpetuation of threat cycle and the interplay of the autonomic nervous system and the immune system, and the way that even the 20% that we could harness as conscious from the brain is being fed by the 80% unconscious nervous system and all of its assessment of threat and danger, which is increasing now because you're sick. And We know that going ahead and figuring out how to harness that 20% and redirect it to partner with the 80% unconscious, we know that regulating the autonomic nervous system in that way is the way in. And remember how I said that the immune system has different functions from a state of safety and connection versus a state of protection? Well, you cannot fight infection accurately or appropriately and completely with a good T helper 1 response when you've been living in a state of chronic inflammation, therefore a state of chronic protection, for too long. You lose your T helper 1 capacity to be strong enough to eradicate an infection. So chronic Lyme or other tick-borne infections, and now long COVID. Long COVID often has a component of ongoing viral replication even long after the infection. So this is another example where in those folks, the T helper 1 response was not strong enough. There was not an effective T helper 1 response at the time of initial infection to eradicate that infection with the immune response, even maybe in the context of using appropriate medications to help the immune system.
Right.
Does everyone actually know that antibiotics and antivirals do not kill our infections? They actually just augment our immune system function to allow our immune system to better act against the pathogens. I thought that was a really neat concept to kind of sink my teeth into when I realized that that's actually what's happening. So that's all to say, if you were unable to eradicate your own tick-borne infection, even with great interventions, again, the biggest opportunity is to lean into regulating the autonomic nervous system, which allows your T helper 1 response to come back online. And then we can do antibiotics or herbs or a combination to go ahead and address the infection that resides continuing to cause problems. The same is true with
it's like the creating the right conditions, the healthy soil. I think I said that to a new member the other day who really was like, oh, it's like the seed or the medication, that's the right one for the diagnosis you have. Your body isn't ready to fully receive it and make the best use of it because the soil is dry, has no little worms in it, no little microbes to do all the good stuff. We need to compost it for a while. We need to get it to be this nice rich loam. Then we're gonna add the medication later if you still need it. Your body might also have brought on healing along the way that was able to just itself activate the proper immunologic response.
And if I may, and this is actually important to me, I'm thinking of a specific person I care about very much, even right now, as I think to say this, but you can hear this in Desperate Patient, Curious Provider. The fact that you have a problem with mold, the fact that you have chronic Lyme in the first place suggests it's a diagnostic that implies that your autonomic nervous system is and has been dysregulated for quite some time. It's the setup. Mast cell activation syndrome, it's the setup. Because again, we here in Massachusetts, this is a Lyme endemic area. All of us have been bitten by ticks so many more times.
Everyone's been bitten by a tick.
And you don't even know, by the way, there's the ones you've seen and the ones you have not seen. I grew up in Connecticut near Lyme. Okay, we've all been bitten. Most people's immune system handles it before even needing antibiotics.
Right.
So let's please start there with what a really, truly robust, highly functioning immune system can do. Then on the next level would be yep, need antibiotics. We'll bang it out with 3 weeks of doxycycline. Great, it's over. Ta-da. Chronic Lyme, no. This suggests it's a diagnostic that immediately tells us we've got more going on here. Likewise.
Because there's no neuroregulation of the organs. You're not in that healthy physiologic functioning state. You're in the threat biology.
Yes, exactly. And so Likewise with mold, and this is important. I mean, the house that I fled, literally, that was making me extremely sick because I have mast cell activation, because I have, at that time, deep autonomic nervous system dysregulation. And at the time, I mean, right, my immune system was not able to keep up with anything. I had chronic infection, chronic viral infection, reawakened viral infection, all of this. But the point is, yes, now because I cannot detoxify from those places, now I have a lot of mold in my system and it is making me very sick. And also the mast cells don't love fungals. And so, there you have it. But my point is, there are people who live in that same house that I love dearly that are fine. So what is it about my immune system? Okay, that is the problem. And this is delicate territory, because this is the thing where there are so many people that I thank goodness that, everybody is sort of out there trying their best really, really hard to find solutions to these complex, newer problems that we don't fully understand yet. Mold being one, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, okay, SIRS, as people know about it, right? And people working very hard to treat that. My criticism of that right now, and other things, right? I don't want to zero in specifically on one, but here's one that is promoting an unreal amount of fear. Unreal. Protocol has to be like this. Meanwhile, I mean, the threat level is increasing in the body. It's very stressful. It feels like it has to be like this. Accessing care is, again, a problem. Financially, a problem. Finding the right provider is a problem. Also, throw out everything you've ever owned and cared about in your life and start over. I mean, and what I am telling you, that is not necessary. Some things may be necessary. Some things may be helpful and supportive. But like, in other words, we need to regulate your autonomic nervous system and reset your ability to detoxify your system. Let's start there.
Stabilize your mast cells and get enough safety in the environment so that your mast cells are not being physically activated by a ton of, things that activate mast cells, which mycotoxins can be among them. But so, yeah, Michaela's exactly right. You do not have to do every single thing on any of these protocols.
You might have to do very little to none, which is that you get into a safe enough environment, safe enough, not pristine.
Perfect.
Safe enough, and you get regulated so that all of your systems are functioning again in a way that allows for detoxification to happen. And for the most part, a lot of those interventions become unnecessary. And so it's so painful to see, the ways that really helping professionals that are trying so hard and really intending, and thank goodness, because even knowing, that that's part of your picture can be helpful in like, this makes some sense. And I know I need to get out of this particular environment and all of that. But again, not dissimilar to the low histamine diet thing, like anything that is actually creating a tremendous amount of fear is totally undermining your ability to heal, and is actually reinforcing the sense of threat in your body.
And I want to say that people who are toxic with any substance, mold, metal, or anything else, and people who do have chronic infection of any type, often, because they're so inflamed, because their mast cells are so activated, because their autonomic nervous systems are so dysregulated, oftentimes they have a very hard time tolerating any interventions, any medication, any supplement, many foods. We meet lots of people who are down to just a handful of foods that they feel like they don't react to. And so that itself ends up being an obstacle, because they fear, oh my gosh, I can't do any of the things that would get me better. And oftentimes those protocols, as they're taught, say, yeah, you have to do it exactly this way. You have to take this dose. You have to take it this many times, et cetera, et cetera. And we're here to say, thank goodness, we can push pause on all of that. We can work if the only thing we can tolerate is autonomic nervous system regulation work, which does not involve putting anything in your mouth other than your food and water, that is enough to end up interrupting the cycles. Now, sometimes we can find some very gentle substances that can help intervene and can give a little bit of stability in that inflammatory process so that we slow that threat cycle down a little faster. But it's okay if you can't tolerate anything. We can do this without tolerating anything.
Yep.
I'm
Christine,
looking at our
list. Yeah.
Time. There's like one thread that I think might be useful. I think we've touched on almost everything that we were hoping to in our conversation. And we like to do these live because the conversation that flows just weaves in all these different things, and all of it we hope is helpful for you to just keep getting to know our approach, us, how, and sort of feeling into if working with us is something that might be we want to explore at some point. So thank you for the grace of just sort of, we purposefully want these to be really conversational and just weaving in these different folds and layers. So there's one thing that does come up, which, because we're framing autonomic nervous system regulation, safety and connection, safe in connection, right? This is what we're talking about. We're moving towards more and more regulation, more feeling of safety. Some people say, I don't have connection and support in my life. That could look like, I live alone. I feel so isolated. I've been so sick for so long. My world has really shrunk. Sometimes people have a partner or friends and family that don't feel supportive, that almost feels like a saboteur, or someone that feels like there's a tension there around the person being sick for so long, or whatever. It could look like a lot of different particular things, but just this sense of, will this work for me? I don't have safety and connection in my life.
Who wants to take it?
I will start. So I can put the credit for this brilliance in OCC's program to Michaela, that she knew from the very first time reading Stephen Porges's work that, in fact, connection is part of the medicine. It is part of the treatment, and that we would be most successful in helping our members to get well if we used connection and group healing as part of our intervention. And I'm a good old-fashioned introvert, and I was used to one-on-one appointments. And I thought, people are not going to go for that. People are not going to agree to get vulnerable in group. And boy, was I wrong. Connection is absolutely part of the journey that helps to bring wellness about faster, more efficiently, and it's fun, guys. It's fun. People have fun here.
Really
The gift of developing a small community. We do small groups. There is no big a huge conference room. The gift of developing a small community of people who speak the same language and share a common goal, that are really working in this challenging field of developing autonomic regulation. There's nothing better than being connected with folks on this journey. And at OCC, you are connected with folks on this journey. We are all on this journey, and all of our members are on this journey. And so I just want to say, as a former skeptic, that connection is part of the treatment. And I swear to you, it works, and we do it well here.
Yeah. In fact, it's so much a part of the treatment, and that we've seen the need to enhance the amount of connection that's available to people, the amount of holding, the amount of access to regular ability to connect to people. And so we're I'm very, very proud and pleased that we are just right now in the process of developing our first pilot inaugural polyvagal partners program, which is really a mentorship program. It's modeled in the spirit of, it's not the same as or in terms of roles and responsibilities, but similar to a sponsor in a recovery program where it is a part of the, in this case, the polyvagal partners' ongoing treatment and healing and deepening of their own therapeutic work that involves reaching back and helping someone who's just beginning and being in a role of encouraging where, it's true. We're beings actually that want to help take care of each other. And when we're able to do it competently, it feels really good. And there's a way that when we, partly because, sadly, we don't take extraordinarily good care. A lot of us don't take extraordinarily good care of ourselves at all. And so there's a way that we might deny the practice to ourselves, but almost in a desire to care for another, that we would reach and engage and do the practice. And so it really, this isn't the time to really launch into explaining that, but just to say that right at this very moment, we are building in a lot more connection and this weaving of connection that throughout the larger OCC community that is going to be really felt and deepened. And
in our last video where we explain the components of care, we talk a lot about this because we actually name, like, there's this group and there's this group and then here's another place of community and here's another, so you can see all the different ways that we weave this in. And actually, what you just said reminded me of one more thing. I know we're way getting over time, but you mentioned how self-care is so hard for so many of us, and especially for people who are used to the caregiving role and who learned, that's part of their survival strategies in life. This is how they got the approval, the safety, the, feeling okay in their early development was being the caregiver. A lot of people who are socialized female in our culture, but anyone, it can be literally anyone, there's some patterns in that. We see this in a lot of our people, the move that we're making to do this autonomic nervous system regulation work and this self-care kind of work can be really threatening because it is moving out of, I only can give. That's how I know I'm valuable as a person here. And so that's another pattern we see. That's another obstacle we're very familiar with. We know how to work with that. But that just reminded me of that other piece that we mentioned.
I have one more that
you want to say a
little
bit,
to the connection piece, which is just that for anyone who has some neurodivergence and actually feels safer on their own and has questions around that. Likewise, we have, our friends, the avoidance, if anyone is familiar with attachment theory and just how close connection actually can bring up a sense of threat, and that people appear to feel safer in isolation, so to speak, or, very limited social contact. This is the place that I go to feel safe. What we actually know through studies is that no matter, even if the subjective experience is that I feel safer, that is still a survival response that was developed early on. And the cortisol and adrenaline spikes that are present in people, it's actually higher than, like, for example, the anxiously attached person who's like really seeking out connection and wanting, and is actively feeling the threat but wants connection. So just to name that, these are things that we see and are also prepared to work with, and that no matter who you are and no matter what the biology implies, we need your biology requires some form of safe feeling connection, and there can be ways of working with this. And Safe and Sound Protocol, for example, the earliest studies showing efficacy there were done with children who had autism spectrum disorder. And so we can talk more about that, but just wanting to introduce that as a potential obstacle, or a belief anyway, that is actually a huge opportunity to bring on more healing, more capacity for healing in the body.
Yeah.
I'd like to just say to that the I feel safer alone was developed in your nervous system at a time when I feel safer alone than dying. That is what the choices were. So now, as an adult, it still feels safer to be alone, but you're not understanding that is the comparison where that alone safety was built. And that the description that Michaela gave, where there are studies to show that in fact the biochemistry and the heart rate variability, we know definitively that children with autism, that their biology improved toward health, growth, and restoration, I should say, shifted. Their biology shifted toward health, growth, and restoration with the intervention of the Safe and Sound protocol in the studies. We know that adults with autism, that their biology, their heart rate variability increases in safe connection, even though the felt sense is I feel safer not in connection with other people. So anyway, there is good science to support that. Again, titrating in very carefully and slowly. We're not trying to just shove anyone into a situation that feels wildly uncomfortable. But just to understand, like, there is science to back up these concepts that we are teaching, and we meet everyone where they are.
I think probably some people like hearing, I'd rather be alone than die. Like, it is a confusing concept that I think, it deserves, but, so like really in infancy, right, a lack of attunement, lack of adequate touch, lack of adequate, there's a beautiful video called the Still-Faced Experiment that people could look, where in just 2 minutes of a mother going flat with her affect, the child is in extreme distress. So it goes to show that like the infant or a toddler really responds very quickly to the absence of connection as being vulnerable to death. And so part of what happens is that if that's happening enough or for a prolonged enough period of time, then the potential solution is either I feel like I'm going to die, or maybe that is the experience that I have, but learning how to come alone and like feel okay on my own. Another look at that might be like a little bit older, right? But just like a very dysregulated parent, some children's response will be to abandon themselves and get into a very please and appease pattern where they're really just hypervigilant and scanning for ways to stay safe with this dysregulated parent. And another kid is going to go, yep, you do you. I'll
bye.
Yeah, I've got books and blocks. Okay.
Yeah.
So just to give a couple more peeks at how that could develop, and that the truth is, yes, you felt safer alone than that. But so that is hardwired into your autonomic nervous system, but your biology insists that you be in connection in order to function optimally.
And I think the sort of concluding thing, all of these different threads that we're naming as obstacles are truly just different manifestations of dysregulated autonomic nervous systems, which if you're connecting with us, if you're interested or exploring or think we might be someone that could work with you, you have a dysregulated I mean, we also pretty much everyone in our culture has a dysregulated nervous system to different degrees. And if you're with chronic illness, and I'm doing this because that's me too, like we've explained, right? It's part of inherently that is what's happening. And so it can manifest in all these different ways, because if your way is hypervigilance and you're like, well, I don't think your program's going to work for me because of this, and I don't think and I don't know if I liked that, and it's all bad, it's all wrong, it's not going to work, right? That's one way it might show up. It might show up in all these other ways that we've been describing, and that literally is the work that we're here to do together with you, is to accompany you on this journey towards, in like we said, in a titrated, safe, slow way, towards more and more regulation, that you'll be accessing more and more regulation. You'll have more neuroregulation of your organ systems. You'll be, shifting your biology from this threat biology, physiology response towards its health, its growth, its restoration. Mitochondria are apparently blending together. I thought that was so cool. All this great juicy stuff that we want to be happening in your physiology, that is the work that we're here to do with you. So all of these obstacles are things that we fully expect as part of just what our autonomic nervous systems do. And we bring, we lovingly bring this to light and support you in each of these, in our work together with you in our program, which you can learn more about in our very long live stream that I've added chapters to. So no one's expected to watch the one where we talk about our components of care. But we hope that this helped give you like a flavor of and maybe tapped into some things that you might be concerned about or worried about thinking about our program. So I hope we could give you some understanding and context for how we understand all of it in the spirit of the exact work that we're here to do together with you. Me too.
Yeah, if I may, I think the final thing, as you're describing that, just to name it right now, autonomic nervous system regulation, making neuroplastic change takes time. It is a long process that takes time. Before we can even really get to trying to do any of the neuroplastic change, there's learning about it and beginning to really see the patterns in our own lives, really noticing and beginning to see and work with it on that level. And then eventually we're beginning the process of attempting to bring in these new pathways, pruning the old ones that are no longer serving us. Remember, all of these were adaptive at one point in time, but have become maladaptive relative to now. And so there's this long process that we eventually are going to be introducing new ways of working with it, ways of creating these new neural pathways and pruning the other ones. But this takes time. And so if you are someone who is like, not fully bought in, part of the way that you stay safe is like being very skeptical. And so you're in this constant evaluation process, there will be all of the evidence in the world that this is not working for you. Once again, in and of itself, the obstacle is that you have not been able to, and we understand, but recognizing it as a true obstacle is important if we're going to be able to get to the point where we can help you toward the healing that is available to you, everyone, through this path. Genuinely everyone.
Thank you, Michaela. I think that's a really great place to wrap up. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, folks, who are joining us today, and anyone watching later. We're so glad that you spent a little bit more time with us in one of our videos. Bye, everybody.